The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy out there. I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for the Fisdap tips and tricks. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that due to the volume of attendees, all lines have been muted. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat, and we'll save some time to address them at the end of the webinar. Today's tips and tricks topic is Appendix G reporting. Our host is Kurt Van Oort, a solutions consultant who's been with Fisdap for over 4 years. So without further delay, I'll pass it off to you, Kurt.
Thanks, Haley. Can you hear me okay still?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, and we got the Fisdap tips and tricks slide up.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for taking some time in this stressful bit of our lives here, and to set aside to learn a little bit more about Appendix G. And we're going to go over some of the basics today. We're tweaking a couple things yet in the reports, and I was hoping it was going to be live for this. I'm going to be up front with you. It's not quite there yet. I checked with the product manager. They're still working on a few things yet to get the final reporting thing completed. So the end reports still have a couple of tweaks in them that are going to impact some of you for a little bit longer yet. We're going to cover the basics today again and go through the Appendix G setup of making sure that everything is set up and mapped properly. We're finding a lot of schools haven't done that yet, and we're also going to cover the proper flow of how students can then enter their data properly. So when these last little few tweaks get pulled out of the reporting tool, I guess I should say the individual progress reporting tool, then when those tweaks get fixed, we'll hold another more detailed one on some of the final reporting things. So we're going to kind of split it in half. Apologies for that, but we're doing the best we can to get this done as fast as possible. We know some programs are coming up with graduations coming up here in July and August from cohorts that started July 1st. That's another thing too, just so everybody's aware, the requirements for this new Appendix G are for cohorts started July 1st of 2019 or after. So if you have an accelerated program, we do realize that some of you have some higher need for this coming up, and we will have it done in time for that. So again, we're going to cover the basics of making sure everything's set up and mapped, and how students need to enter things properly as they're going through skill sheets, scenarios, and everything else, just to ensure that when the reporting thing is finalized, that everything is coming out in the right spot. So that's what we're going to cover today. If you're comfortable as we're going through that, please feel free to slip out. You can always catch a recorded one too, or if you just want a refresher, stay right where you're at. That said, let's pop over into some of the Fisdap stuff now. So I'm logged in as an administrator, as you would be at Fisdap. You need to make sure that one thing I do want to say is where the program settings are, which is in the account tab, not every single one of your instructors has access to this area. Only the instructors that you've given the administrative rights to can get into the program information area. And the reason I say that is this is where all of your settings take place, where we make sure those are set properly. And also more importantly, this is where we have a quick reference guide. This reference guide is made available to help figure out where to connect the dots. What do I need to have selected in the different areas within Fisdap to get it to populate properly on Appendix G, whether it's Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, or Table 4. If you have instructors, and not if, the instructors that you have set up that do not have admins, make sure you download this PDF. Maybe some programs are laminating a sheet to leave in the lab and giving PDFs out to all the instructors to make sure they have it, but just know that not every instructor in your program can access this reference guide. And it's very helpful to find out what do I need to do to get something to land in column 1 of Table 2, and also what needs to be done to make sure that I'm getting proper credit for a nasotracheal intubation of an adult from the skill sheet. So this thing is going to line everything up for the columns and also the rows. So let's get into these settings a little bit, because it's something we do want to talk about today. Still finding programs, and again, if you haven't had a cohort that's started yet since July 1 of 2019, it's not as urgent, but if you have, we need to make sure everybody's going into this settings area of Appendix in the account program area where you can manage your Appendix G minimums. And a couple of things need to be done, especially if you do not put any minimums in, we will default to the COAMP's recommended minimums when it comes time to reporting, just so you know. It's ideal that you plug in your own minimums on what the program establishes, but we will put in the minimums if nothing is there. But what's vitally important is when you come to this section for the first time, what we need to know is the lab practice items that you use, which one correlates to what COA is calling obtain a patient history from an alert and oriented patient. And we need that because we do allow you to name lab practice items your own. You don't have to use the default that comes with it for National Registry. And so if that's done, we really need that mapping to be done to where you can go through here, and this drop-down list will show every single skill or lab practice item that you have available. And you really just need to go down and say, what are we going to use? You know, if it's this skill or this lab practice item, well, then that's the one. But we really need to know when students input data here, we're going to pull it into Appendix G here. That's why this needs to get done. And there was a substantial number actually that haven't done that yet. I don't remember what I had that set at. So we'll put it right there. So now I can go ahead and say I have a comprehensive normal of adult, of pediatric, and just go through all these. And you have to do that on table 2, and then also again over here on table 4. These are those BLS skills that need to be checked off on with some sort of a skill sheet and run in some sort of a scenario. Again, this mapping needs to be done. You may even need to add a few skills into your lab practice items yourself because a few things have been added, a couple have been split. If you need help with any of this and you haven't done it yet, please reach out to myself or the support team at Fisdap or Ben if you work with him, or Tashi or anybody, and make sure you're getting some help in case you do need to do some adding of lab practice items, attaching of skill sheets if you use them, and those types of things. And I will post my information afterwards, but there's always support at fisdap.net and the instructor hotline, which I will pull up just a second in case some of you don't have that. Give me just a moment. I think it's worthwhile to grab this. You can grab this stuff here. I'll make it a little bit bigger here. So I'll sit here for a second. Go ahead and jot both of these down if you need. You'll have my email at the end. This is a great tool to get texts to me that I can respond to if I'm in a meeting maybe. We're here to help, but we need you to get in contact with us too to do that. We'll wait a few more seconds and you can write any of those down. And what this number does, what is so important, is this is going to get you past tier 1 support at JBL and more directly into contact with somebody that from Fisdap that can help you with your questions. So we're mapping Appendix G, Table 2, and Table 4. That's going to help us pull data. If you don't plug in minimums, we will put in the COAMS minimums. To establish your minimums, you can either go right in here and plug them in, if you will, and we will change colors just like the COA spreadsheet does. If you've already filled out that COAMP spreadsheet that you can download from over here, the most recent one was November of 2018. That's the one that you get to fill out all of your requirements. If you have done that, you can import that directly into Fisdap from this point, just by selecting that spreadsheet that you filled out and your team has signed off on. Go ahead and put all of that in there and then hit submit, and it will pull it up, and it's actually going to input your minimums from that spreadsheet. And that's how we're going to establish minimums. That's step 1. That's extremely important. Step 2 is how do students need to input data properly so that when I am pulling numbers and everything is mapped correctly and we've got the final things fixed on the reports that we have to do when those 3 things are all set. How do students need to input data? Because as long as we have students inputting data properly, the reporting thing at the end is something we have to fix, and it's making those numbers report right. The data is there. If it's done correct, we will get those last few things balanced out. So what I want to walk you through real quick is how is a student going to go through and, when we're in lab, what are we gathering? Because that's the biggest changes is how we're gathering things in a lab between a lab practice item and inputting things from scenarios. And that's what we're going to cover in here. That's the biggest change. Let's go into a lab shift. I'll say we have one, had one yesterday, so I can go into that. And typically what's happened, and I like to use IVArm mainly because I've heard Gordy Cox use it in COAMS workshops, so I know it's legit that way. And also it makes sense because in Appendix G, this specific skill happens to hit all 4 categories in that table too. So that's why I want to use that. So let's use an example of, we're going to be working IV therapy as our skill, and today is your first day of skills lab, and how we're adjusting to social distancing and things by maybe having students watch a video of somebody doing the skill properly as part of their training, as opposed to so much hands-on. These are all things that we can, come into to work better within labs. But ultimately, I'm going to practice on an IVArm, and let's say it's waist high. It's on a cart, and my supplies are laid out nicely. There's a skill sheet sitting here, so I'm going to be using a lab practice item with a skill sheet. Whether it's digital or whether it's paper is irrelevant. It's the lab practice item, and I'm going to have a peer sign off on me a couple of times maybe, and an instructor finalize it. When I'm using that lab practice item, they're going to come down here and they're going to grab the skill they're doing, and they're going to go ahead and hit go. And as doing this, whether they use the digital skill sheet within Fisdap, that we do have all the National Registry ones preloaded. We can create these customized for you if you need, if you're still using paper. We can get into more digital. They're going to get graded by a peer or an instructor, whoever is doing it. We're going to go through and start checking all these kind of things. If you're using paper, that's fine. You can still use this. This new Appendix G still is a reference, because what you're doing now is, instead of digitally checking these, you're just going to go ahead and use a piece of paper. You're still going to put at the end in the tick box, did they pass or did they fail? So as they're doing these kind of things, what this is going to do is, I'm using a lab practice item, and when I give myself credit for this, this is going to fall into Appendix G, Table 2, Column 1. This is the one where they need to use a lab practice item. This is the one that's going to reference back to the National Registry portfolio that was kicked off a couple of years ago. All of these things kind of align and fall in together. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this my 2 times, and I'm going to get my instructor sign off. This is when I input things into lab practice item. Everything else going forward in lab, unless it's a lab practice item for Table 2 or going into Table 4 where I'm doing some of those BLS skills, the skills where I mapped it to what we call it, all of those are going to use this lab practice item. Everything else we do in lab, we're going to put in a patient encounter. And how this works is, let's take this IV therapy where I'm doing an IVArm, and it's with a check sheet. It's on a table. It's perfect height. I got it. I'm excited. Now we want to make it a little bit more difficult for the student to learn through this progression of learning. So now I'm going to take this IVArm and let's put it down on the floor, and let's just give them a little mini story, as Gordy calls it, or a small scenario. It's a 47-year-old female. She's in the teacher's lounge. Just got done teaching history. Is having difficulty breathing. You show up. What are some of the things you're going to do? Or we might, get some strips going. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to start an IV. Great. Why don't you start the IV? This time I'm doing the IV. I'm down on the floor. It's a little bit more difficult. I'm starting to think. There's a little mini story. There's no checklist. What am I doing? I'm starting to get a little bit more difficult. I'm starting to have patient encounter information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this information in as a patient. And it's very important up here. We've added these spots here for a formative scenario. Any type of formative scenario is this little mini story, that Gordy Cox has talked about and I've heard other people use. And we're going ahead and making things a little bit more difficult. This is going to be a formative skills scenario. The student is going to put in the age. Here's where I can follow that reference guide that you're going to email to all of your instructors and maybe laminate and put in your labs to view. It's going to tell you exactly what needs to get done. They will put in some sort of a impression. And I did an IV. I performed it. Oops, not 156. Here's where it went. I did it on the first attempt. I was successful. Yes. They also do need to check, and it's going to be in that reference guide. These two, I performed the interview and exam. By doing this, I don't have to put anything else. I'm now getting credit for an IV, and it's going to populate into column 2, and it's coming from a formative scenario. I can hit save. Now, as things progress, maybe before you send your students into a clinical setting, you have them practice IVs on themselves. So this is a live patient encounter. If they go ahead and input the patient, and then when they click, instead of being a mannequin, if they go ahead and make it a live patient, then we're going to populate that into column 3, which is the column where it's keeping track of just those individual things. But if you're doing it in a lab, and we have a human patient and I did an IV, it will go into table 2, column 3. If it's done on a mannequin, these formative scenarios will go into table 2. As we progress more and more through a more evolved, and now we're thinking, oh, this is more of a summative scenario, we're prepping for maybe a psychomotor exam for National Registry. We're really throwing a lot of stuff at them. What's the magic number? Nobody knows. I've heard where people use simulation and scenarios and really getting confused on that. And I think it's really about when are we really throwing some stuff at them? And they're going to be doing multiple things and having multiple tracks of thinking and critical thinking kicking in, and they're managing the scene. You know, at that point, we're going to say this is a summative scenario. And now this is going to start populating into, think of table 2, column 4. And also, when we're running scenarios, we're also going to be impacting possibly table 3. I'm going to go back and show you all those if we have time. But we'll be impacting table 3 that way. Was I the team member? Was I a successful team leader? Now we'll start getting credit for different things. And as you're filling out these patient encounters, either formative or summative, if there's multiple things that they can start getting credit for, we will populate. In this one example here, the student would get success for an IV. We'd say this is a mannequin. So they get success for an IV, and they would also get success in table 3 for a successful team leader. So as they start qualifying for multiple impressions and things like that, we will go ahead and put those into multiple tables, columns, and rows within Fisdap. And all of this is what's made this thing extremely difficult going through. That's what we're doing in the lab as they're inputting things from a clinical standpoint or a field standpoint. Again, this is all prior to field internship or capstone. If they're doing general EMS ride-alongs and getting some field time, or they're in the clinical period, you know, when they're inputting their data, it's going to populate where it needs to. I think I'm going to jump back a second here and pop into the actual tables a second. And through that again from this viewpoint of when students are entering their data. Let's say we're doing IV therapy. Again, IVArm, perfect height. We're doing it with a skill sheet, some peer-to-peer, an instructor sign-off because there's an asterisk here. It is required at least one instructor sign-off. We're going through, we're doing the check sheet. We're entering it either paper or digital into Fisdap. I'm getting credit for these that I need here by using that lab practice item. And again, that's table 2 and table 4, lab practice items. From that point on, I'm using add a patient. So now we're running little mini stories, mini scenarios, starting to make things more difficult, throwing more things on top of it, moving through the progression of learning. As I enter that IV therapy, and I say that I did it with a formative scenario, now we're going to start populating column 2. Again, we could be populating into column 1 here with these lab practice items in table 4. We're doing that live stick in a lab on a classmate. I say it's a human as a patient, not a mannequin. Now we're going to progress in that IV therapy over here into column 3. And now also, as our students are going out into the clinical world and they're getting asked by a nurse, hey, Kurt, could you go up to room 4? We need an IV. I'm getting practice with my quick add skills. When I'm on my clinical doing quick add skills for IV therapy, running around sticking a bunch, those are going to populate into here. As I'm filling out my normal clinical and field paperwork, we will start populating some of these numbers as well. But in the lab, sticking on that, when I say it's a summative scenario, we're doing multiple things. We're getting towards that difficult stage. If I say it's a summative scenario and it's marked, now those numbers will also start populating in here. So you'll start getting numbers from clinical experiences, field experiences, summative scenarios. Your summative scenarios will be hitting here. Also there, you know, as you're doing team leads and team members, we're going to start populating these categories. And then also from all scenarios as things are relevant that pertain to the second column of this final table for BLS skills and scenarios, we'll start hitting those. So it's a combination of all of that that kind of gets it all trickling. And we're working as hard as we can. We're frustrated, as some of you may be, that have been trying to get this going for a little bit, as we still continue to get, you know, the final things tweaked on the reports. But we, you know, we're working to get those right. They will be coming out as soon as it's been pushed live. Believe me, the horns are going to sound, and we'll do whatever we need to do with webinars that people can attend to get those final things done. So I'm going to stop chatting on my end. We'll open up the chat world. I think Haley's been looking. If anybody's been piping any questions in, we can answer those at this time. If not, everybody go out and do what we can to stay safe and healthy. Enjoy the time we can with family. You know, I'm in a situation. I got an 82-year-old mom, and you know, it's tough going to see her and standing outside of her sliding glass window and where she lives, and you know, keeping that distance. But it's something we all have to do. I appreciate each and every one of you, and thanks for everything. Any questions?
Hey, Kurt, we do have one question. We have one from Leah Tilden. It says, will formative patient encounters in the lab also count for team leader, or only if it's marked as summative?
Well, that's a good question. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open up this quick reference guide, and we're going to walk through that and show how this tool, I'll make it bigger, can be used. So we're going into, got to scroll down a bit to get into table 3. We're going to teach how to fish, and hopefully I do a good job of it. So here we are in table 3. So here we are. A scenario is defined as a subject of any type in a lab. Successful team leader was checked. Respiratory. If it's marked as formative or summative, it's going to base on how we click that box. So if I say it's, and I'm going to double check with developers on this, and we've got your email. Actually, we have everybody's email address. If it's anything different than this, we'll send out an email to everybody. But from what I can tell on this, what I would say is, it looks like whether it's formative or summative, if they check team leader, they're going to get credit for a team leader. Great question. Thank you for asking that one. Does anybody else see anything on it that might be different? No, I think that answers that correctly. Like I said, if it's different than that, we will send out an email to everybody in attendance. Anything else come in, Haley?
Yep, we have another question for quick skill IV on a classmate. What do we put for primary impression?
The quick add skills typically are not going to be in a lab. I think you can activate those in a lab. I'd suggest using that at a patient. The quick add skill portion really would be more of, I would use it just in clinical settings. And that way you're not putting in any patients, you're not, oh, and I see what you're saying, though. You're saying what intervention would you put in? Dang, another good question. I'll have to find out. Let me write that down, and we'll email everybody with that one. Whoever sent that, was that right? You want to know if we're adding them as a patient, the required fields, what should we put down? That's a great question, actually.
Kelly said yes, that is what she was asking.
Okay. And you have, like I said, we'll answer that to everybody.
Yep. And we do have a couple of more longer and more program specific questions. So for any of those that have come in, I will send those off to Kurt, and he will be able to address those via email. So
yeah, okay, yeah, if you can address them to me, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you, Kurt, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Our next Tips and Tricks webinar will actually be next Wednesday, April 8th. So we're gonna go ahead and skip the bye week there to address the need of remote exam proctoring. Then we'll go back to our normal biweekly schedule beginning on April 29th. So to stay up to date on all upcoming webinars or to see recordings of previous webinars, you can visit go.fisdap.net/tipsandtricks. And as always, there will be a quick survey after the webinar, so please be sure to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar, if you have any questions, and if you have any suggestions for future topics. And again, anyone who, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kurt.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, again, anyone who asked a question that wasn't addressed during the webinar, we will send you an email shortly after.
And I did just put my email address and my cell phone number in the chat, and anybody at any time, please feel free to call, text, or email. And I do offer to instructors, please don't give this to any of your students. if you ever find yourself really in a bind and it's just like, man, I know it's Saturday and it's 2 afternoon. It's 2 in the afternoon and I was working on this. I just can't figure it out. Send me a text. It's okay. If I can chat, we'll chat. If I'm, doing something or, I can't respond right away, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But, feel free to use that stuff after hours. If it gets to students and it gets overloaded, I can always get a new number. Most people are pretty good with that, but we're here for you. And please use us and abuse us as we all get through this together. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.